evening. Welcome. My name is Heather Raymond, and I am the incoming president of the University of Alberta Alumni Association, and it is my honor to welcome you to the 2019 University of Alberta Last Lecture. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory in which we are gathered today, a welcoming place for peoples from around the world. I would like to acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux. As alumni, or future alumni of the University of Alberta, we are all united by one common theme: do great things. One of the many ways that we cultivate greatness is through connection and interaction with our campus community. Events like the last lecture bring together alumni, faculty, and current students to celebrate the success of another academic year. I'd like to pause and congratulate so many students for attending a lecture tonight that is not for credit. Your commitment to supporting the university community is an example of already doing great things. The last lecture event grew out of our alumni members being asked what was the most impactful experience as part of your time on campus. The overwhelming response was their experience with faculty. The Alumni Association wanted to celebrate the faculty members who inspire students, who challenge them, who are innovative, who give their students the skills and confidence to succeed to do great things. This year, more than 100 professors were nominated by their students to deliver the last lecture. They all sounded amazing, but the person who received the most nominations has a fresh perspective on learning, introductory and cadaver human anatomy that has his students raving about his creative and unique teaching style, calling him fresh, hilarious, and next level. And as a side note, tonight's speaker was making a difference in students' lives before he started teaching. While he was a student at the University of Alberta, he co-founded the Hide and Seek Club and was one of the inaugural members of the Alumni Student Council. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce you to Adam Pinkoski, a sessional instructor in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation, and the 2019 Last Lecturer. Adam?
Okay, good. So I already gauged the audience. I already know who I've taught and who I haven't. The interesting thing, though, is that there's far more people who I haven't taught than I have. And it's been, this is so weird. My parents are here, and they've never seen me lecture before. But the weird thing about that is the last time my mom and I were in a lecture theater together was in my first semester of my first year of my undergrad, because we were both students in the very same class. So this is very weird. We've come a long way, Mom. Look at me now. This is so cool. But the last lecture is an opportunity to go off script and to throw the syllabus away. And I think that's a lot easier said than done, because children love rules and crave structure, and it's not a young man's game, let's put it that way, okay? I am very young, and I'm painfully aware of it. In my very first lecture that I ever gave, when we finished the syllabus and we were moving on to the content, I asked, does anybody have any questions? And the first thing, hand shot straight up without any hesitation, yeah, how old are you? Not old enough to be offended by the question, and at the time I was 23 years old, and I'm 24 now, so I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot in that time. But normally when it comes to teaching and when it comes to these moments, I go into the semester, and for the most part, age and experience tend to be viewed as being very much synonymous. And for the most part, I can understand that, especially in something like teaching at the university level, where you see some young punk standing in front of you and you do not want to believe that they're an expert in their field and they're going to be teaching you something, especially when they're barely older, if not the same age as you. But I normally have 2 weeks at least. I've got a full semester's worth of time to sort of prove myself and to prove that that I deserve to be here and that I know my stuff. Unfortunately, I don't have 2 weeks. I don't think any of you guys would stick around if this was any longer than just a single session. So what I wanted to do more than anything tonight was to talk about and to go through some of the steps that I've taken that have gotten me to this very moment today, and some of the lessons that I've learned over my time as an instructor here at the university. And what I hope more than anything is, as I'm talking through some of these stories and going through some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, I hope that many of you can, come away having learned something. Because as an instructor, that's why I'm here. That's what I do. And I would find no greater success than for you guys to have to come away today having learned something. But I went through draft after draft after draft, and I didn't know what to say, and there were so many stories I wanted to tell, so many different story arcs that I wanted to go through, and there's so many things that made the cut and then didn't make the cut, and then didn't make the cut again, and then made the cut. But out of all this, there were two things that held constant, no matter what, that I was going to talk about tonight. And I hope to stick by that. As much as possible. The first thing is I want to ask every single one of you a question, and that question is, how will you be brushing your teeth in 5 years' time? You laugh, but I want you to think about it. Think about it seriously, the process of what that entails, of physically brushing your teeth. Not today, not tomorrow, but in 5 years' time. The other thing that I was absolutely adamant about, much to the disapproval of my girlfriend, is that no matter what, I was going to throw in, and we were going to talk about in the final lesson that was taught today, was going to be entirely based around the lyrics from Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears. Now, for those of you who don't know, because this came out in the year 2000, okay? For perspective, the next intake of university students were born in 2001, okay? So this is considered a golden oldie now. So for those of you who don't know, this is the verse that I'm talking about, and I'll give you guys time to read it and digest it, and you can try to think of the deeper meaning within it, and that would be very much appreciated if you could. So we'll come back to this in due time, and we'll again answer that question of how will you be brushing your teeth in 5 years' time. We're going to go from apparent disarray right now, and we're going to move on, and I swear it will make sense towards the end. But until then, I'm going to talk. You're going to listen. At least I hope you listen. After teaching a first-year undergraduate course, I got really good at sort of gauging interest and lowering my expectations. So if you can listen for like 40% of the time, then again, I've achieved my goals, okay? In the process, you might learn something, and as an educator, I hope you do. So some of you might laugh, and some of you are laughing already, and that's great. And if you're not, there's a lot more pop culture references that are going to come, and you're going to have a long night. Some of you might cry, and some of you are crying already. Mom, how's it going? And if you are, you're in for an even longer night. I might even cry. I've tried my hardest over the last 2 months since I was told that this was happening I've been trying so hard not to process this and trying just not to understand the magnitude and the gravity of what this actually entails. So in the event that does happen at any point, my girlfriend has been armed with stuffed toys that she'll be throwing at me just to make sure that I stay on track in case I deviate at any point in time. Just like that, okay? Fortunately, she's not on trial for her aim, so it's all good. Okay, but that's just to make sure I stay on target and I stay on point here. But there's one misconception that I want to sort of cover before we really break into the material here, and it's that the last lecture is given to a retiring instructor. And while that might be the tradition for some universities, that's not the case with this particular lecture series. So I want to clarify right now that I am not retiring. At least I don't think I am. I'm a sessional instructor, so this might very well be my last lecture. We'll talk after. It's the Dean of Kinesiology, Dr. Carrie Mummery, for those of you who don't know. But, yeah. Now, I've always held true. There's some things from pop culture that I just absolutely love, and that I think there's wonderful lessons to be learned from them. And the line from Ricky Bobby's The Talladega Nights, if you're not first, you're last. And I've barely even had my first lecture. Now this is my last lecture. So if you're not first, you're last. Well, this isn't my first lecture, so it's my last lecture. And so I'm very happy to be here and have this opportunity. But this is also my first time giving the last lecture, and I was always told that my first time should be shared with somebody special. So I'm just glad that I could share this moment with all of you. And that's not a joke. That's actually very true and earnest, and that comes from the heart. This does mean quite a lot to be here tonight and to have this opportunity to speak to all of you. But as soon as this is all over, I can and I absolutely will refer to this as my last lecture. So from now on, this is always going to be the last lecture, the last lecture that I gave, and I can't wait to start using that. So be prepared over the next little while. But all wordplay aside, this moment does mean a tremendous amount to me, and I think it is tremendously. It's something that words alone just don't do it justice. You see, in 2015, Dr. Brian Mirage delivered his last lecture. And shortly after that, he championed for me. 2 years later, he championed for me to teach his class while he was on sabbatical, his motor performance and skill acquisition class. That was the very first class I ever taught, and that was my introduction and my door, the door that was opened into the profession of teaching for me. Shortly after that, I was given the opportunity to teach introductory human anatomy with the faculty of kinesiology. And that was the same exact class that I took as a student in the faculty of kinesiology in my very first semester of my very first year of my undergraduate degree. And so that class as well was in this very same room, TELUS 150. So it's almost poetic that all those years ago that I had my very first lecture here as a student. And today I'm standing in front of you giving the last lecture as an instructor. Like I said, words don't do it justice, but it seems almost poetic that this is happening. And again, I'm going to try not to process it because I'd rather not break down in front of 300 people and have it all recorded too. It doesn't sound like a good time. But like I said, when I started out teaching, I was 23 years old. If there's one thing I've learned from Blink-182 lyrics is that nobody likes you when you're 23. And yet, Brian saw something in me. Dr. Brian Mirage saw something in me that no one else did. He put faith in me. As he put it, he put blind faith in me. And here we are today. And at the time, no one else would have looked at a 23-year-old and given them an opportunity to instruct and to stand here and to teach a class at the university level. What I'm trying to say is that Brian was Bradley Cooper to my Lady Gaga. If there's 100 people in a room and 99 don't believe in you, you just need one person to believe in you. But I didn't always want to teach. I didn't always want to be an instructor. In fact, when you first enter kinesiology in the first year, you ask anybody what they want to do. It's either physical therapy or I want to be a gym teacher. There's nowhere in between. It's always that's the binary. There's a little bit of medical hopes now as well, but that's changed over the years. But all I knew is I didn't want to fit on that binary, and I wanted to do something different. So anytime I was asked, what do you want to do? What do you want to do after you graduate? What do you want to do with your life? I just wanted to do cool things, and that's it. Whatever my definition of what cool was, that's what I want to do. At the time when I first started my undergraduate degree, what I thought was cool was the TELUS World of Science Edmonton. In fact, that's actually where I got my very first job. And I worked as a demonstrator and an interpreter there, where I would explain scientific concepts in interactive and engaging ways to children and some of the bigger kids that were with them too. Apparently, you need to have adult supervision. I don't have kids, so I didn't know that. But anyways, so I'd be teaching these kids, but for the most part, even though my primary audience, my target audience was to talk to kids, I found it far more entertaining and far more satisfying to be able to entertain an adult when your primary audience is to entertain children. And that's not something that, it's something that's quite difficult, but subtext is a beautiful thing. So there was this one time that there was I had a model of the human body, and you could remove the organs. Okay, so you can remove all the organs in it. And there was a mom, dad, daughter. Daughter's about 4 years old, little girl. They come up to the body, and as she would pull out an organ, I'd talk a little bit about it. And so she'd pull out the stomach. That's where your food goes. She'd pull out the heart. You put your hand on your chest. You feel that beating? Thump, thump, thump. That's your heart that's beating. She goes, whoa, cool. That's what's pumping the red gooey stuff, the blood, all around your body. She pulls out the liver. That's what cleans that red gooey stuff. And it goes great with a side of fava beans and a nice Chianti. Dad found it hilarious. Mom, not so much. But by the time the dust had settled, and we're talking a couple seconds here, the daughter had already moved on, and she had already removed the spleen, pancreas, and performed a craniotomy and ripped the brain out. So she was well on track, and she was cruising. But it was while I was there that I got this taste, and I got this taste in this introduction to sort of teaching towards the age of 18 years and older, because you can tend to speak with a little bit less of a filter when you're talking to adults. Although, teaching kids is also fun, but for me, it was primarily with the adults. And also while I was there, I got this insatiable desire and this taste for performance art and public speaking. Now I know for some people this is absolutely paralyzing and their worst nightmares right now, but for me this is heaven. This is my happy place. This is so good. So with that in mind, sorry, my mouth's drying up like crazy. So with that in mind, the logical progression for me anyways seemed to be teaching at the university level. And so this was always on my mind, at least since I had that introduction to it. And so the logical progression was to teach at the university level. That's something that I started aiming a target for myself, but I never put a timeline on it. And so for this to happen when it did, again, at 23 years old, that far surpassed anything I could have ever thought about, okay? It happened far sooner. And normally when people are asked to teach at the university level, it's based on one of two things, and it tends to be extensive experience in the research, in relevant subject matters that they're going to be teaching, or extensive experience in the actual application and sort of the lived applications of their knowledge. At the time, I was 23 years old, I was barely 2 months out of my master's, and I was being asked to teach a subject matter that I hadn't actively studied since I was a student in that very same class. So I was being thrown into the deep end. Okay, I was very much thrown into the deep end here, and it was a very much sink or swim situation. For perspective, okay, when we're born, we go through our significant motor or movement development, and in our infancy, it tends to follow a top-down approach. So the first thing we see in terms of our movement abilities on our own tends to be the ability to lift our head. After that, our movement patterns get a little bit more complex. There tends to be more degrees of freedom that you start to see being freed up until eventually we get to the point where our musculoskeletal system, our muscles, and our skeleton are strong enough to support our own body weight. We can resist the force of gravity, and we can stand on our own legs, unassisted. So when I taught that very first class, that KIN 203 motor performance and skill acquisition class, this was me. And this is how I viewed everybody else at the university level. And all I could think about is that I want to be like that. That's what I want to be. I want to be running just like everybody else. But there's a lot of steps that have to go between this process here and being able to run. Not only that, but running efficiently. And so when I had that opportunity and I was teaching that KIN 203, that motor performance and skill acquisition class, last winter, I took my very first steps as an instructor. And walking is a beautiful thing. Okay, walking is beautiful. The practical sort of applied aspect of it, I'm somewhat ambivalent about it. But the theory of walking is strangely beautiful because it is an incredibly efficient way of movement. Because we're overly reliant on gravity and momentum to move us forward. And because of those two things, we end up expending very little energy for the amount of work we get done. So walking is very efficient, and that's what I love about it. Now, for those of you who can't remember how when we all had our introductory lessons when we learned how to walk, when we were just this tall. The way it works is that, before we even get into that, because I completely missed the main point of this whole thing. To distill it even further is that the entire point of walking, and sort of if we were to break it down to make it as simple as possible, walking is basically just a series of falling and catching ourselves. And that's what I love, and that's what's so beautiful about it. Again, we're overly reliant on gravity and momentum to actually propel us forward. Again, walking is just a series of falling and catching ourselves. Okay? So, now back to the baby walking. When you walk, all it is, first thing we do is we swing our leg forward, and our leg, it's not baby talk with the baby. Our leg has a certain mass to it. So when we lift our leg up and we move it forward, our center of mass shifts as well. Now, what ends up happening is, now that my center of mass is shifted forward, I'm considered to be unstable, and I will have the tendency to fall in that direction, the same direction as my mass is shifted. So I tend to fall forward. But before I fall flat on my face, my leg catches my body weight, and I'm able to catch myself. With enough time and practice and expertise, we end up getting really good at falling on one leg, and then we move on to the next leg. She starts to falter and starts to tip over a little bit towards the end. So she's still working on it. But with, again, a little bit of time, a little bit extra development, we start walking a little bit quicker, and we start putting it together. Now, sometimes we need the carrot at the end there, just that extra little motivation. But again, over time, the movement becomes more fluid, and it becomes more seamless, and we get better and better at it over time. And then eventually, we get to the point where we're able to run. And when we run, When we run, all it is we're just falling harder and faster, but we're catching ourselves faster as well. And we're able to do it, again, without falling flat on our face. But babies move really inefficiently. Like I said, sort of this bipedal locomotion of running, walking tends to be very efficient. This guy isn't moving all that efficiently. He's got lots of extraneous movements that are going on there. There's a reason why you don't see Usain Bolt running around the 100 meters, running around like that, you know? He tends to be very driven. But in order to get to that point of apparent effortless performance, just like Forrest Gump, there's a lot of time and practice and effort that goes into that. And there's a lot of steps that go into that process. So in order to get to that point of apparent effortless performance, there's a lot of practice and a lot of time. And in order to get to that point as well, you have to fall, and you have to fall a lot. One of the big things in the learning to walk process, a lot of it, you know, we've mastered it, and it's been years since we've learned this, but we have to fall and we have to hit the ground. That's a necessity, because we have to have that reference point. So when we fall, at the very beginning, we have to hit the ground to know, I don't like that. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not moving. I need to make sure that I catch myself next time. No, we're doing this subconsciously, but eventually we get to the point where we're able to do it fluidly, and then we can get to the point of running. So when it comes to my very first class as an instructor in that KIN 203 class, again, I was taking my very first steps as an instructor. And so to set the scene, okay, because when I first started, I fell, and I fell a lot. But this was necessary, absolutely mandatory in the process to become a better instructor and to grow as a person. In the very first class, it's at 8 a.m. And so I figure 7:45 a.m., no one's going to show up. No one's going to be there early. I'll have more than enough time to get my slides set up, and you know, we're all going to be good. I walk in, the entire lecture theater is packed. 100 students, all of them keeners, 7:45 a.m., all of them showed up early for it. So, to set the scene, again, the door is on the right-hand side, so while I walk in on the right, the podium is over on the left. So as I step in there, everybody's in full voice, full volume. As I start walking over towards the podium, there's this wave of silence that starts following me. As I get closer and closer to the podium until finally I got there, and you could hear a pin drop. Okay, it is dead silent. That's a very eerie thing when you go from complete, you know, a maximal audible volume to absolutely nothing, all like that. And like I said, age and experience tend to be viewed as being synonymous, especially in something that requires, you know, high level of experience to do. You look at a young doctor, someone who's fresh out of their medical degree, and you think, nope. So, same thing with me. They looked at me and they did just that. Nope. And after a couple seconds, what felt like, you know, an absolute eternity, like that, all of a sudden they started talking again. And so it's a very eerie thing to go from complete silence to maximal audible volume once again. But what made it even eerier is the fact I knew every single one of them was talking about me. And probably not in a good way either. I was very fortunate that it was a mandatory class for them to graduate. Otherwise, it would have been a very small size by the end of it. And it didn't get much better either, because as I'm reading the syllabus and we finally get into the material, I'm reading the syllabus, I look up and I'm trying to gauge the student's interest, and there's one guy who's just got his arms crossed and he's just furrowing his brow and just, nope. And he's making sure that it's very well known that he is not okay with this. And we lock eyes, and he dragged me in, and I couldn't look away. It was very, very off-putting. So anyways, you talk about your very first steps, how you need to fall. For me, the first steps that I took were met with complete silence, abject disapproval, and just shock and awe. And so it was very off-putting. But I continued, that needed to be done. I needed to take those first steps, and I needed to fall. And so over time, over the next couple weeks in the semester, I continued to fall. But I didn't know if I was catching myself or not. You see, because I had no actual way of gauging my performance. If you ask me how a class is going and how the teaching's going, I have no idea. I've never taught myself before. Ask the students. But as an instructor, I have a very biased perspective of how things are going. And my main objective is to educate. And if I don't know if I'm educating or not, it's a very strange thing. So this is something that's very important in order to get a true gauge of our performance, in order to optimize our abilities and our skill set and become the best people we possibly can be. We require something that's known as external feedback. It's mainly known, you take the external, it's mainly known as feedback. It's a primary way that we refer to it. But as human beings, we have the ability to take on tremendous amounts of information and use it to direct our performance and direct our behaviors, and so that we can keep adapting and evolving over time. But a lot of the time, sometimes we need a perspective that goes above and beyond what we can provide ourselves. And that's what I needed at that very time. And so I tried to gauge that performance because I knew I was falling and I just didn't know if I was catching myself or not. And so I started asking the students, anytime I was one-on-one at the beginning of lectures or at the end and they were asking questions, I'd ask, how am I doing? How is my teaching doing? How's it going? And it was almost like they had a scripted response, that every single one of them were complicit in all this. And they'd say, oh yeah, it's fine, you're doing good. Every single time. They were being polite, and that's fair. They didn't want to be, brutally honest, which is understandable because, receiving honest feedback a lot of the time is soul-crushing. And it is it hurts to hear that you suck at something. No one likes that, right? And if you do, well, teach their own. But anyways, I'd always ask them, and they'd always be fairly polite. But the fact of the matter is that, again, I was taking my very first steps. And when a toddler takes their first steps, you have very low expectations for their actual performance. He's walking, that's amazing. He pooped his pants, but he's walking, right? So, and it was the same thing for me. I was walking, but that's all they saw it as. They're like, yeah, good for you. You're a young punk, you're walking, that's great. But that wasn't good enough for me. And I was very fortunate because at the time there was one of my students who was working with another friend of mine. They didn't know the mutual connection. And so the student just unloaded and was ranting and venting about something that I was doing. And they weren't at all happy with it. To my friend, being a fairly, nice guy, came up to me and told me how much I was doing a terrible job. And it was the first time I received I had true feedback. And it was soul-crushing. Again, it doesn't feel good to hear that you're not doing a good job, but I took it on board and I utilized it so that I could, better my performance. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the students, and it's not about me. So I put my ego aside and used it to direct it. And again, I was using it to catch myself. I was using it to catch myself and to correct my behavior, and so that in the future, if anything like this ever came along, I could detect it on my own and I could correct my own behavior. So I was getting better and I was starting to catch myself. I was starting to move forward. I was starting to walk, but I was still lagging the pack. So when I started here. Everybody was here. This is kind of how I was going now. I was walking, but in a very inefficient way. And so I needed to get better, and I need to become more efficient. I need to sort of hone in my movement parameters so that I could catch up to that pack that was in front of me. Because I was taking that feedback on, I was getting better, but it wasn't the best that I could have been. And so, what I did, and I think this is a big thing for me, and one thing that's definitely helped in sort of becoming, a better instructor is, as soon as students ask for midterms, or as soon as we have the midterms, they get the results back and they ask to meet about their exams. At first, that is the most, that hurts when they ask to see their midterm. And mainly because I look at it and I spent so long on that key and that exam and making sure it was airtight and airtight and ironclad. I spent so much time on that anytime they ask to see their exams and review the material because they're not happy with their grade, I don't look at it as the student sort of having an issue with it, but I take it as a personal shot against myself because I spent so long doing that. And so whenever I was a student in these meetings, I would always hate them because there's confrontation, and I knew I'd be talking to somebody who had no interest in listening to what I had to say. So I would spend, and again, as a student, I would spend so much time preparing to dig my heels in and stand my ground and face the enemy that was the instructor. Now that I was on the other side of things, I was preparing for those meetings the exact same way, where I was ready to stand my ground, dig my heels in, and face the enemy, and I was going to blow them out of the water no matter what. The only issue is that I held all the power now. And that's not a healthy mindset to take into those kind of settings. At the time, I was reading the book, The Art of War, and now the entire point of The Art of War, it's about how to win a war, but it's how to do so without ever actually engaging in battle in the first place. And it's one of the most applicable books, and probably the best book in terms of leadership and management that you could ever read. And I think some of the best lessons that can be learned in life come from those that have seen the worst of it. One of my favorite quotes of all time came from a former CIA counterterrorism agent. She worked undercover, and when she was asked to reflect on her time in the field, she said the single best way in order to disarm your enemy is by listening to them, because everybody thinks they're the good guy. And so when you take this to heart, again, I was preparing for those meetings with those students as if they were the enemy, and I was ready to blow them out of the water and dig my heels in and not give them any chance. And that wasn't healthy at all. That wasn't a good way of doing it. So instead, I armed myself with literally just the ability of listening to them. And it's remarkable what that does when you go into those meetings. Again, very high stress situation, because grades are everything to a student, right? And so we go into those meetings, and I just listened to what they had to say. Now, I'm not saying it's a perfect situation all the time. Some of them would walk in looking, and they'd complain why I wouldn't round their 40% up to a 90. So it was a little bit of a battle, but for the most part, in just listening to what they had to say, even though vast majority of them wouldn't actually get any marks reversed or wouldn't get the marks back that they wanted, a lot of the time, just listening to what they had to say, I get a better sort of sense of the underlying issue as to their poor performance, or their poorly perceived performance in their eyes. So we'd use that. Once we got a better idea of it, we'd isolate the areas in which they did poorly and that they struggled with, and like I said, I'd give them brutally honest feedback about why they did poorly and where they can improve on. I don't like doing that. Students probably didn't like hearing it, that they knew they'd messed up and they didn't want to know why, but yet they took it on board, and vast majority of students, after having those meetings, it's actually quite remarkable looking at the significant change in performance and sort of the next assessments that they carry on. It's truly remarkable. So I think that's one of the coolest things. And I think just in that process of just listening to students and actually sort of trying to understand their perspective and where they're coming from, it really helped. And again, I was walking, but very inefficiently, and just doing that, because no two students are the same. They're unique little snowflakes. No two students are the same, but it definitely helped hone in that movement pattern so that I could not just walk, but now I could run. I was catching up with the pack. Because I'm so young, it's actually it does help quite a tremendous amount, actually, because I'm so young to sort of relate to students. But it's kind of a double-edged sword. When I first found out that I had received my last lecture, when I first found out, I had about a month before it was publicly announced. And so in that time, I told a couple people, and one of those people told me, they said they strongly recommend that I should read Randy Pasha's The Last Lecture. But as a student, hearing the words recommend reading in the same sentence, I didn't read it. What I did, though, like any good student, is I found the video adaptation and I watched that instead. And if you haven't seen it, Dr. Randy Pasha's The Last Lecture, it's on YouTube. It's all about achieving your childhood dreams. It is the best, probably 80 minutes you could possibly spend in your day after this lecture right now. But when I was a student, I would actually, I'd take notes in my lectures, and as most students should. But I wouldn't just take notes of the material that was on the screen. I would take notes of some of the traits that my instructors were actually sort of doing. Just anything that the instructors were doing. Because I knew I wanted to be an instructor. I knew I wanted to be them. And I had all the answers in front of me as to like what would make a good instructor, what would make a bad one. So I'd start making, not a burn book, but I'd start making notes of saying the good positive qualities and traits of an instructor, and the bad stuff as well. And so I'd list them down, and I'd have these pages and pages of notes. And so I did this so that when I had my chance, I wouldn't necessarily know what to do, but I would know what not to do. And so when my opportunity finally came around, I was looking through my notes, and there was some positive qualities. There was a lot of recurring positive qualities, but two stood out more than any other. And so the first one that was sort of a recurring positive quality and something that made it very easy to learn from and very sort of engaging was the usage of anecdotal evidence and sort of application of the knowledge. I can teach myself a textbook, and I have done. I can read a textbook cover to cover, no problem. And I can do that in my own time. I could do it at my house. I can do it on a boat. I can do it on a goat. Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you do it. But a lecture or a lesson should be there, at least if you're learning from somebody else, it should be there to reinforce that knowledge. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by seeing applications that you just can't get from a textbook. So one of the things that I like to talk about, and that I will talk about right now, is sort of, to give a little bit of insight into this. Anatomy is the study of structure. Particularly, when we talk about anatomy, human anatomy is the study of structures pertaining to the human body and how those structures relate to one another. Now, if you know your function, if you know your structure through anatomy, then you can understand function. And if you understand function, then you can make sense of dysfunction, or when something doesn't work as it should. And when you have an understanding of that, then what you can end up doing is it makes it that much easier when you're actually trying to find a way to actually fix that issue or fix the dysfunction. So, our central nervous system is made up of our brain and our spinal cord. Those guys are going to generate, what those guys are really good at is generating an electrical impulse or an electrical signal. This signal is going to travel down these spaghetti-like structures called nerves. And those nerves are going to carry that electrical signal until it gets to a muscle. At the muscle, there's a space where there's going to be a conversion from that electrical energy into mechanical energy. When we have that conversion, what ends up happening is our muscle is going to contract. When a muscle contracts, it pulls on the bones, and it results in movement, and we can exert a force. And that's how we move. That's the entirety of how we move, pretty much. Very simplified. So there's your structure, there's your function. Now with dysfunction, if we take something like a spinal cord injury, all of a sudden we've disrupted that pathway. And so even though the brain and the spinal cord might be able to still generate that electrical impulse, there's no way of it actually traveling down from that level down towards the muscle itself. And so while the muscles are still electrically compliant, they can still receive an electrical signal, they can still work just fine. They're just not receiving the signal they had before. And so a lot of the time, the muscle just wastes away and it dies away. So the application of this that I like to sort of reinforce when I talk about the peripheral nervous system, just like we did here, is I like to talk about my work, because I'm only an instructor by night. By day, I work as a research associate for a tech company. And so what we specialize in is technology for rehabilitation, specifically for individuals with stroke and spinal cord injury. And so one of the products we have, something that we design is called the Regressed, and it's basically an electrical stimulator that sits on the muscles of the forearm. Because if you see someone with a spinal cord injury, a lot of the time, they don't have the ability to use their hands. And so right now, this device is sitting on my forearm. And so on the anterior, the front of my forearm, there's muscles that perform hand flexion or hand close. And on the posterior side, there's the muscles, or the back side of my forearm, it's the muscles that do the movement of hand open or wrist extension. Okay? And so what this does, we turn it on. We're going to make sure this is working. Like I said, it's not a lecture unless there's technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. So what this is doing right now is it's sending an external electrical impulse into the muscles in my forearm. I'm not doing this movement right now, by the way. This is just purely from the electrical impulse being sent into the muscle itself. If I push the button again, it's now stimulating them on the anterior side or the front of my forearm. So I'm now making a fist, and I can't open that up anymore. I let it go, and now I've got total control of my hand. So I do this in the lectures as well. Here you go. Okay, I'm going to surrender the usage of my hand for the next 5 minutes. Don't hit it just yet, because I do need to take a drink of water. Okay. So, let's try that again. Okay. There we go. Okay, so. The second recurring quality this was so much easier in my apartment when there was no one watching. Okay, the second recurring quality that I found through sort of taking notes of all my instructors was the usage of lay language. And so when it comes to the academic level, or when it comes to post-secondary institutions, there's a lot of brilliant minds. There's a lot of brilliant minds that are there, and the University of Alberta is no different. But one of the biggest issues I find, especially when you become an expert in a particular field, when you become an expert in a particular field, there we go. When you become an expert in a particular field, is that it becomes very hard to communicate or articulate a point with someone else who's not also an expert in that field. And I'm no different. Anatomy is my bread and butter. That's the area where I excel, and that's where my true expertise lies. And so to put things into perspective, in terms of my calendar, in the month of August, I spend my time teaching physical therapy and teaching their anatomy class. And they condense what should be a 4-semester, what should be a 4-month course, they condense into 4 weeks, okay? So they condense it into 4 weeks. And so they need to know everything about anatomy in that time. They learn a textbook cover to cover. And so they need to know everything cover to cover. And so it's a tremendous amount of knowledge to know in that time. And so by the end of that month, we are riffing and we are going through everything so intensely that no one else could even understand us. We're incomprehensible to anybody who doesn't know their anatomy at all. And so less than a week later, in the first week of September, is my first lecture with the Faculty of Kinesiology and their introductory human anatomy class. Now, these are now students who have never been in a university class before, and all of a sudden, I'm riffing at the same pace that I was with the physio students. And I'm going off and off and off and just keep going on and on and on because this is, so easy for me. I love anatomy and I can talk about it all day if I really wanted to. We're not going to, but then someone throws their hand up after about 5 minutes of me riffing and they say, "What does anterior mean?" And all of a sudden, I'm stuck at a little bit of a crossroad because I don't actually know how to communicate to them. I know how to speak the language. Anatomy is a different language all on its own, and I speak it very well. But to 200 bright-eyed, bushy-tailed undergrad students, they've never spoken the language before, so it really complicated things. And so I had to really go back, and I really had to focus on how do I actually communicate and talk, and essentially explaining a language that I know, but I don't know how to teach the actual language itself until they know it. So it's a very complicated thing, and it's a big issue that a lot of, I think, academics fall into. And like I said, I'm no different. So when I was younger, I grew up in England, and if in grade school in England, you have to wear, I'm actually going to take this off. So I'd rather not be shocked for the rest of this. Okay, we're good, sleeves are going up. So when I was younger, I grew up in England, and so if you don't know anything about grade school in England, you have to wear a uniform. You have to wear the exact same thing every single day. And so for 5 years, I wore the exact same thing every single day because I had to. And now that I have the autonomy to do whatever I want and sort of wear what I want, I wear the exact same thing every single day. It's mainly because I really like the sweater, and it's got a little bit of a zip on it that I can fit the microphone on, and I don't have any other clothing that does that, and the khakis are the only thing that matches it. So you got to accessorize. But so I wear the exact same thing every day to my lectures, and the funny thing is now so do my students. In fact, that wasn't even me. That wasn't even me. That was one of the students. That's me right there. That was on Halloween, and this is, if this is the last lecture I was to ever give, this is an important point that an important story, an important lesson that I think needs to be taught. So this was on Halloween, and to set the scene, we're talking again about sort of grade school. When we're in grade school, we've got a seating arrangement, okay? You've got a seating arrangement, and you've told you need to sit in this seat, but you want to sit everywhere else but that seat, right? As soon as you get to university, you've got far more seats to choose from, and it will be a cold day in hell before anybody sits in my seat, and you'll have to drag my body out of that seat if anybody dares take it from me. But as an instructor, it actually helps a tremendous amount for consistency, because I look around, and even though I might not know names in a sea of faces, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly who you are, because you sit there all the time. You're you. But like it helps, and I feel like I actually know the people based on where they sit. So on the day that this happened, right before the lecture starts, there's 20 students come in, and they sit in the first 2 rows. And right away, red flags are going up, because I don't recognize any of them. And I've never seen them before, because that's not the 20 students who sit in the first 2 rows. So it's very confusing for me. And the only thing I could think about is the fact that there's a midterm coming up the next week. And I've never seen these faces before. And these are just some students that are trying to cozy up to me after skipping the entire semester. And they're just trying to get good marks. And that's all I could think about the entire time. And so I was so focused on the lecture that as I was sitting there, as I was giving the lecture the whole time, I was just thinking about how the fact that there's these smug little students writing their smug little notes, and for some reason they're laughing the whole time because they're being, with these smug faces, and for some reason they're all wearing the same thing. And so it was very confusing, but I wasn't putting anything together the whole time. It wasn't until the very end that one of the students pointed it out to me and said, yeah, listen, and after an agonizing amount of time of actually adding on more and more hints, that I realized that there were 20 people dressed just like me sitting right in front of me for an hour. But this is an important point. This is an important lesson for everybody. And so this is something that's called inattentional blindness, where we spend so much, we're so focused on a particular thing and particular sort of stimuli or objects within our environment that we fail to recognize some very important cues that, that might just be missed. For me, this was the fact that there were 20 people dressed like me sitting right in front of me for an hour, and I had no idea. For you, I'm assuming, for the majority of you, it's how the fact that every time the word "the" has been mentioned in the lecture so far, it's happened in doubles. Did anybody notice this? Hands up if you noticed this. Okay, those of you who didn't, we're going to point it out. So I'm going to give you a chance to read the slide. Okay, read it carefully. Okay, you ready? There it is right there. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to make sure we're all on the same page here. Okay, back to external feedback. There it is, right there. We're going to go back to this quote, this brilliant quote. There it is. There's two of them there, too. How about Dr. Randy Pasha's The Last Lecture? So if this was the last lecture I was to ever give, this is the hill that I'm going to die on, because 20 of those students got me, and I wanted to get my own back against them. So if this is the last lecture I'm ever going to give, I'm glad I've been given the opportunity to do that. But it's very strange that I'm teaching the same classes that I took as a student. So it's very weird. I'm getting lots of memories coming back from when I was a student in those same classes, and so it's a lot of awkwardness and gangliness that I kind of could do without. But it's very strange because I'm again teaching a first-year class. I'm thinking about when I was a student in my very first year of my undergraduate degree, and I went to university because I was passionate about science and about learning more than I currently did. And at the time, I was very interested in the human body, particularly sports sciences. And so kinesiology was a logical progression for me, and it made total sense for me to go into that field. The only thing is, when I was in my first year, I struggled with being able to bridge academics and being able to bridge academic success with that passion and that interest. And so there was a big struggle. And I would always hear from, at least what I perceived as the older and the wiser third-year students, that would say, oh, don't worry, C's get degrees. And so while I don't actively advocate for that, I was very faithful to that mantra. But this is the issue, is that whenever I would try to teach this, or whenever I would try to tell this to my students, at least in the 100 level class, anytime they would, because they come straight from out of high school where they're getting 90s and 100s, like these crazy and inflated grades, and then they all of a sudden be in university and it kicked their ass into place, and they would get 60s and 70s, and they have no idea how to react, and they're saying, this is, I'm not going to get into the program I want to, and they're talking about how it's the end of their lives. And I try to relate to them saying, yeah, I was in the same position, but they only look at the final product. And I'm like, okay, well, I have no shame. This is my transcript, and I show it to them all the time. This is my first year. Okay, like I said, C's get degrees. Well, okay, again, I don't actively advocate for that, but I didn't do all too hot in my first year, okay? And I've turned out okay. I'll let you guys be the judge on that one. The only thing that I would say that actually actively bothers me about that is the fact that in the class that I taught, in that Kin 100, that Introductory Human Anatomy class, I got an A- in that, which means that there's 23 students that did better than me in that class when I taught them. And so I'm good at keeping professional and personal sort of opinions and ideologies separate, but this one is flirting a very fine line. But time heals all wounds, so I've gotten past it. It's all good. But when I entered my second year of my degree, I got much better at bridging academic success with my interest in the passion, the material. And so my grades got better. I'm not going to put my transcript up, but just take my word for it. Okay, it got better. Again, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here, okay? But it was in my second year, my second year, when my pen would become the most interesting thing in the room. And it's a strange thing. But the thing about the pen was, specifically, it was the clicking mechanics. Okay? Laugh all you want, but this was the most interesting thing for me at the time. See, when you click a pen, you turn it on. Okay, makes sense? Yeah? When you unclick a pen, you turn it off, and the nib sort of retracts back into the body of the pen, okay? But for some reason, that was the most interesting thing to me. And anytime I tried to unclick the pen in particular, it didn't quite feel right. There was something about it that didn't quite feel right. And so I'd have to click and unclick, click, unclick, click, unclick, all the time. And I had to keep going and going and going. repeating the process over and over and over again. Until finally, I had missed the entire lecture. I was known as the guy who would click pens the whole time. Nobody wanted to sit next to me. Nobody likes the guy who clicks pens. But for me, that was the most interesting thing in the room. And in particular, it didn't just end with the pen. You see, when I was clicking the pen, I would do it and I would keep clicking it because it didn't quite feel right every time I unclicked it. If I didn't unclick it properly, whatever the right way was, do you guys know what the right way is to unclick a pen? No, seriously, I'm asking because they don't come with an instruction manual, okay? It seems like a fairly simple process that doesn't require that. But you see, anytime that I would unclick the pen and it didn't feel right, I would have to keep going. Because if I didn't unclick it properly in whatever the right manner was, whatever was proper, then to me, that would manifest out of control. And so something like a menial task of clicking my pen would all of a sudden turn into, if I didn't unclick it properly, then it would mean that my pen would burst when I put it in my bag. If my pen burst, it would ruin my notes. If it ruined my notes, then I couldn't study. And if I couldn't study, I would fail the exam. And if I failed the exam, then I would drop out. And if I dropped out, then inevitably it would lead to me killing myself. Now, it's a very strange thing when you have a manifestation from a very simple menial task like clicking a pen to going to, a fairly permanent solution. But that was the thought process that I had. And it wouldn't just stop at pens, but it would be menial tasks like clicking pens, brushing my teeth, walking upstairs, alone or in pairs, just like slinkies, anything like that. You can laugh, it's okay. But anyways, this manifested and it got worse and worse and worse over time. And so over the next couple weeks, it got to the point where I was counting steps and I had to count steps. And if I walked one path one day and I counted a certain number of steps one time, and I walked the same path the next day, and I didn't get the same number of steps, I'd have to do it again because I wasn't walking in the right way, whatever that right way was. And so one day, I think the best way to describe it is it's the equivalent of what I guess you would say is a mental breakdown, where I was outside the bus loop at Hub, and I was walking that path, same path that I'd walked every day before that, and I didn't get the right number of steps. And so I had to walk it again. But like any good scientist and any good researcher, you have to have statistical significance with an N of 5. So I had to do it 5 times. So I was walking and pacing, counting 5 times. And I was pacing, and I didn't get the right number of counts. So I had to go again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And then eventually it got to the point where I was missing my class. I need to go to class, but I need to pace. I need to go to class. I need to pace. I need to go to class. I need to now study for that class that I missed. I need to pace. I need to go to class. I need to go to soccer practice. I need to pace. I need to kill myself because I can't do this anymore. This is painful, and I've bottomed out, and I can't do this anymore. Now, when you have a toxic internal monologue like that, it is very hard to understand that is toxic or that is not normal. Like I said before about external feedback, you need that in order to optimize your performance. And at the time, I had never told anybody about this. All I knew was what I was feeling, and I thought this was normal. And so I carried on with it. And just as I'm bottoming out, as I'm pacing like crazy, and what was probably for about 8 hours, I would say, my mom bumped into me and asked me if I wanted to go home. She had just finished her shift. It was purely coincidental. She bumped into me on the way to her car. So I put on a brave face, I said yes, and I went home with her, and everything was fine. Because no one wants their loved ones to see them in pain or suffering. Now, when you have a toxic mentality like that, and when you're sitting in the pit of despair, it is very hard to see that there's any other way out except to continue digging deeper. And so that's what I thought was the way that this was going to go. I was going to continue digging deeper. When really, a lot of the time you just need someone else to turn your head around and show that the ladder is just behind you. The way out isn't all that tough. So that night, my parents knew something was up. And they start badgering me, and they start pushing and pushing and pushing. And after much resistance on my end, finally I relented, and I told them everything that was going on. That was the first time I ever told anybody what was happening. And it was unbelievable. Okay, they were so supportive because I was the first time I actually acknowledged the fact that this isn't normal and this isn't healthy. As I'm guessing by the silence in the room right now, again, it's not normal, and that's not healthy. So from that point onwards, we started to put together support structures to sort of help this and sort of figure out what the hell was going on. And so the first thing I did, I called a crisis hotline. They got me hooked up with a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a counselor, the big three, And so I was talking with them and trying to figure out what was going on. And in a way, they really helped me to handle what I learned to be obsessive compulsions. And I'm guessing some of you may have guessed that too by now, if I haven't already told you, because I do talk about this in my lectures all the time. I always tell my classes these stories, different details each time, but the point's still the same. The end result never changes. So anyways, the first time I ever went to a psychiatrist, I think every great story should start with that, okay? If you're on a first date and it starts with that, run. But first time I saw a psychiatrist, I had 45 minutes where I loaded everything that I just said, except in much deeper detail. And I was so liberated. This is the first time I'd ever shared this with somebody. And I felt so excited. And it was just, because I felt alive again. And this was incredible to be able to share this with somebody. And the first thing he said after 45 minutes of nonstop just unleashing onto him, the first thing he says is, "That's crazy." Now, there's certain words you should use when you're dealing with, this kind of stuff. And if you're in the medical profession, especially on the side of mental health, crazy is a word you should probably avoid. But anyways, I got better. So moving on from that, I knew what I was working with. I knew what I was up against. And it's one of the biggest things, one of the biggest causes of stress is the fear of the unknown. I didn't know what the hell was going on with me at the time. And now I did. And so I was able to put in support structures that helped me facilitate this and helped me excel. And so I used this, and when I was moving into my third year of my undergraduate degree, I knew what I was working with, and I knew how to be positive about it and how to work with it. And so I just wanted to have as much fun as possible to sort of replace those anxiety-ridden years, or those anxiety-ridden months that I had in my second year. And so one of the first things, what I did is one of the helping processes is a whole bunch of my friends and I, in order to have fun and let loose and relieve some stress, we would play hide and seek around different buildings on campus. All around the city. We'd play in West Ed and we'd play in IKEA. When we told more of our friends, they got really interested. And so we formed the hide and seek club on campus, where we would play hide and seek in different buildings on campus each week. Six years on, it's still going strong. Hint, hint, join the club. I'm not actively involved in it anymore, but you should be. It's open to staff, faculty, alumni, students, everybody. But anyways, the following year, we attempted to break the world record for the largest game of hide and seek. That's us in front. That's me standing in front of about a crowd of 750 people playing hide and seek in the Butterdome. And if you can see, we also got Spider-Man too, which is pretty cool. A couple weeks later, that actually instigated, and that actually started indirectly. We didn't advocate for this. This just kind of happened organically. But all of a sudden, there were these mass participation hide and seek games that were starting up all over the world, because for this event, we got local, provincial, national, and international media attention. And so these spin-off events, these mass participation hide and seek events started popping up. 32,000 people said they were attending an event in IKEA in Amsterdam. There were so many people that IKEA had to come out with an outright statement saying that they banned the game in all of their stores. And so at the time, we were viewed as patient zero. And so we had all these news outlets from all over the world that were calling us and asking for interviews and asking for expert insight into these international affairs concerning hide and seek. And so the moral of the story here is, when an opportunity knocks, you have to answer that door. This is my resume. This is still one of the first things that's on there. Does anybody remember the PSAs from the early 2000s to late 1990s, where it was, "What's your thing?" Right? And it was asking kids, or just kids doing random things like playing the tuba on the back of a bus for some reason, or dancing in laundromats, as you do. But the whole point of it is that everybody has a thing. Everybody is good at something. It's just a matter of finding it. And it might not be all that intuitive, but everybody has something that they're good at. And sometimes you have to fall a lot in order to find it, and eventually you'll end up catching yourself and moving forward and propelling yourself forward. For me, I found my thing when I entered my last year of my undergraduate degree. Because that was the first time that I ever had a cadaver anatomy class. For those of you who don't know, cadaver anatomy involves the dissection of bodies that have been donated to medical science, of those who have passed and have donated their bodies for studying purposes. And so anatomy is so wonderfully beautiful, because there are 11 bodily systems that are all housed and bounded by the skin, majority of them anyways, that are bounded by the skin. And they're so tightly sort of interacting with one another. And so the human body, in a way, is like a giant puzzle. That's one thing I love about it, is just the fact that it's like a puzzle and you have to solve it. But when you do a dissection, when you're in a cadaver class, one of the things you have to do is you're given a list of structures you have to find, primarily nerves, arteries, muscles, or veins. Some visceral organs too. But anyways, you're given a list of structures you need to find, and there's a lot of extraneous tissue that you need to get rid of. And so you need to clean, and you need to clean a lot, and you need to spend a lot of endless hours in those labs dissecting. And so for the first time ever, I had a healthy outlet for my obsessive compulsions, because I could actually go in there and I could clean, and I could spend hours and hours and hours. And not only that, but this was the first time where my obsessive compulsions were being rewarded in an academic environment. So I could be, as my psychiatrist put it, I could be crazy, but I get rewarded for it and I get an A for it. So, and I'm totally okay with that. But those hours and hours and hours that I spent in that lab didn't go unnoticed, and that actually spawned into my very first sort of introduction into teaching, which was as a TA with the physical therapy anatomy class. And at the time, I was 22 years old. I was 22 years old teaching a class that's average age is around 25, 26. So there was a very strange age range there. And in fact, I was actually teaching 10 people that I took the same class with in cadaver anatomy. It was very weird. But they didn't view age and experience as being the same thing. They saw I was a skilled set of hands, and they put me to work. And coming on 4 years, I'm still there. And it's working out pretty well. I knew I always wanted, and so, and this is kind of cool, because one thing spawned into another, and eventually it led to me teaching and being a primary instructor and teaching my own class. And this past semester, I was given the opportunity to teach Kin 400, cadaver anatomy, the same class that I took when I found my thing. And so ever since I worked at the TELUS World of Science, I always knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to be an instructor and I wanted to teach. And I remember sitting in Dr. Brian Mirage's last lecture in 2015, sitting in the audience. I remember watching that, saying, someday, when it is earned and it is deserved, and I've truly earned the respect of my students and my peers, that will be me standing up there giving my last lecture. Hopefully not my official last lecture, just the last lecture. If I had known at that moment that I would be delivering the last lecture within 5 years of that time, I would have assumed that I would have gotten to the point where my obsessive compulsions weren't impacting my everyday daily activities. The truth of the matter is, in the build-up to tonight, as stressful as it might have been to sort of piece this all together and think about what to say, the most stressful moments came on the nights where it literally took me hours to brush my teeth. I asked you all the question earlier at the beginning of the lecture, how will you be brushing your teeth in 5 years' time? And honestly, it's probably going to be the exact same way as you are today. That's it. There's nothing special about it. Hopefully that's what you were thinking. But so often we're asked the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? We're so enamored by the big picture and the positive potential of what the future holds that we forget about these little things that are going to remain constant in our lives. And dreams achieved or failed have no impact and no bearing on how we actually approach these activities of daily living, whether it's today, tomorrow, or in 5 years' time. Superficially, we might change, but deep down, you're still going to be the same person that you are today. I know for a fact that my obsessive compulsions are probably going to be with me for the rest of my life. And I know that no matter how stressful and how bad some days might be, the worst part of my day is almost always going to be when I have to brush my teeth or walk up a set of stairs. That's just the way it is. But that's what makes me me, and that's one of the things that has helped me get to this point. So at the beginning of this lecture, I said there were two things that were going to be sort of, to tie this whole thing in, to tie this entire lecture in together. We addressed the first one. The second one, I want to bring back these lyrics here. Because in the build-up to tonight, there were a lot of stressful moments and what do I say? What do I talk about? And I knew from the moment that I was informed that I had received the last lecture, something that I actively can't acknowledge what that means until after this is over, because again, I don't want to break down in front of the cameras. But I knew as soon as I received the last lecture, I knew in that moment that I was going to be obsessing about this and what I was going to say and the way the night is going to go up until this very moment. And I knew that I was going to get to the point where I couldn't actually enjoy the process. So I had to put in something that would ensure that I would have some fun no matter what, and that I could enjoy. And so something that I enjoy more than anything is putting up nonsensical lyrics, having you guys looking for deeper meaning and insight into Britney Spears' Oops, I Did It Again. That makes me happy. But the whole point in this is that, again, don't read too much into that. I don't think Britney even reads too much into her lyrics either. But at the end of the day, you just have to do what makes you happy. And who you are now, or who you become, it doesn't change the majority of things in your life. And that everybody has a thing, and sort of this is in summation, I just want to sort of sum it up in one nice little package. Everyone has a thing, and along the way to finding that thing, even if you found it, if you haven't, you will fall, and you have to fall. It is a necessity. All that matters is whether we choose to pick ourselves up, whether we choose to, keep practicing over time and utilizing feedback so that we can eventually move forward and learn from it. Along the way, we will and we have to be faced with confrontation. And that's something that's a given. And even though we might not enjoy it, sometimes the best weapon that we can arm ourselves with is the ability to listen. Although if you are an MMA or UFC fighter, I wouldn't recommend it. And no matter how difficult things may seem, no matter how deep down you feel, and no matter how far into the pit of despair you might be, sometimes it's the simplest lessons that cut the deepest. You guys pay a lot to be here. I just hope I was worth the price of admission. Thank you. That's actually the line I normally throw in to finish my lectures my last lecture at the end of the semester. You guys pay a lot to be here, so I just hope you were worth the price of. I just hope I was worth the price of admission, because student fees are really high. My rate's going up even higher next time. Apparently, I don't know. But anyways, I can't do that tonight because tonight's event was free. So we can't quite end it like that. You see, being here tonight, this is what makes me happy. This is my happy place, and to have this opportunity is amazing for me. Thank you so much. I feel so humbled and lucky to be here. But anatomy is my thing, and I don't want to deprive those students who came here tonight to learn an anatomy lesson. But this is my once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is my one shot, and there's no other way that I can really put it. I don't know how to explain it, guys. There's so much to pack in, guys. Look. If you had one shot to take one class of anatomy and had to cram in everything you ever needed into one moment, would you pay attention or just take a nap? Yo, his palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Mom's spaghetti, he's ischemic, and on the surface he looks cold and clammy. His arms drop cause his traps aren't contracting. He has a kidney stone met with painful groans. It's moving down his urethra but it won't come out. He's moaning, wow, and Post Maloning now. Oh, he falls apart and look, he's past it. Ow, flow based on anatomy. Upper extremity, too much hypertrophy. Neck like a maple tree, lack of mobility. Try fascial stretch therapy. Overuse injuries, well, then you'll atrophy. Oh, and epidural blocks any no roll. Sacral spinal levels, numbs you vaginally. Relaxing joint laxity. Oh, it's too much for me. Better go get some Red Bull and pull an all-nighter. You better rack your brains, learn the body. The content is intense. Digit 5Z little toe. Gotta know blood cells are made in the bone marrow. Latissimus dorsi is active when you rock climb. You better rack your brains, learn the body. The content is intense. Fascists is shrinking as you grow. Femoral condyles rest on the tibial plateau. During this is us, the lacrimal makes you cry. Muscles aching from cross bridges breaking.
Essay notes innovating, pacemaking, Doy to the foot, Tom, Dick, and not Harry. Cranial nerve 11 is just an accessory, has no sensory. Thumb sits on trapezium, pelvis made of pubis, ischium and ilium, sciatic pinch by piriformis, numb bum syndrome, bronchi antihyalum. Some joints have a labrum and or meniscus, and osteoarthritis results in joint stiffness. Ankle pulse is felt at dorsalis pedis, door handle of the neck, sensa cervicalis. Most abundant bodily protein is collagen, found in tendons, muscle, skin, ligaments, and skeleton. Abridges a ramus, holds a hiatus, sinus and meatus, and so the heartbeat goes lub dub lub. You better rack your brains, learn the body, the content is intense. Deltoids active when you row. Gonna learn about my head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Kegel strengthen your elevator and you better rack your brains, learn the body, the content is intense. Venous valves prevent backflow. Hamstrings bend at the knee unless you're Jon Snow. Nerve plexus is formed by ventral rami. Azygous vein drains the thoracic cage. Excessive inversion causes ankle sprains. Meninges encase and protect the brain. Roots chewed up and broke down by amylase. And the wrist has 2 rows of forecarpal. Some lovers try positions that they can't handle. Radius rotates the forearm during pronation. Smooth muscle relax results in vasodilation. Coronary arterial blockage requires a graft known as a cabbage. Allows blood passage. A stroke can be ischemic or hemorrhagic. This is my class and I'm struggling with the muscles. There's semimembranosus, tendinosis, rectum, biceps, femoris, vastus, lateralis, psoas, ad magnus, brevis, longus, piriformis, iliacus, glute, max, medius, minimus, spinalis, and it's too much for me to learn anatomy. And the bladder's full when you gotta pee, and your PCL's taut when you perform a squat. I tried to draw the brachial plexus, but I forgot. Been at so long my legs have started to clot. My hands are numb now and my eyes bloodshot. I'm giving it all I got. Grades fail me not. I guess I better cram cause I really gotta study a lot. You better rack your brains, learn the body. The content is intense. Plantar surface is the soul. Gotta know shoulder joint is flexing when you bull. Rupture biceps makes your arms look like Popeyes. You better rack your brains, learn the body. The content is intense. It's an awful lot to know, but knowing is half the battles taught by G.I. Joe. I'd like to give a special thank you to alumni. You can learn everything you want to, man. Thank you.
A&P is such a hard act to follow. My name's Megan Sylvester. You may have seen my name on the webpage when you registered for this event. Thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to run around with a microphone in case anyone has any questions and answers, or questions, and Adam, I guess, maybe has answers. We'll do a short Q&A. So
I'm a little hopped up.
Yeah. Short.
So
I don't know. If you want to raise your hand, I'll fall forward quickly over to you.
I gotta sit.
What's the next cool thing on your list?
I don't know. I'm kind of hopped up. I kind of just want to break something right now. Sorry. I don't know. Like I said, a lot has happened in the last year, so I'm kind of just looking forward to the ability of, like, over the next couple months of just focusing on my job, I'm not saying I'm distracted by teaching, but it definitely takes a lot out of me. So I don't know. The next cool thing I'm looking forward to is my actual job. So, and actually sort of doing that without the blinders on. Not that they ever were, but I think that's, yeah. We'll see. I don't know. There's a lot of parodies I'm thinking of. So thank you, Neck, I think is the next one I want to do. But we'll see. Yeah. I honestly don't know.
I guess if there's no further questions, I will put a slide up on the board. And if you think of something after you leave, Adam has kindly offered to give responses to any follow-up questions on our platform switchboard. So I'll put the information up there, and it'll be pinned to the top of the board. It's kind of like a Kijiji-esque ask and answer advice platform that the Alumni Association is running now. So, yeah, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to sit down.
Wow. Like, you're exhausted, so are we. Thanks, Adam, for an incredible lecture. I'm really glad, and I think I talk for the entire group here today, we're glad a colleague gave you the opportunity to walk. And the reason for that is so that you could run. When I think about what you did today is that you gave our students at the U of A wow experience as an instructor. You know, when students come here, they join us because they want to be part of the U of A rich academic culture. And what you've done and what you're doing in your classes is diversifying the teaching and learning and fostering an environment where discovery runs through everything you do. And what's interesting, that was through despair as well as a lecturer. Pretty impressive. So I want to say to you, we're really glad that you came to this event on behalf of the Alumni Association. And I want to thank you, Adam, for your creative lecture. And we want to provide you with a really small token of our gratitude. Today's lecture is that reminder about the amazing work that our professors do here at the University of Alberta. Finding unique ways to keep their students engaged, passionate about curriculum, and inspired to do great things. If tonight's event has inspired you to become more connected with the university, the Alumni Association has many opportunities to volunteer. Just visit the University of Alberta Alumni website, click the Volunteer tab to have a look at the upcoming events, and you can get involved. This summer, we're offering opportunities to give you your green thumb, a workout with planting trees at an Edmonton park, or you could help out at the U of A's own Prairie Urban Farm. If you're a student, we also have great opportunities for you to get involved on campus. We have our Alumni Student Council, which helps inform some of the choices and decisions made in our Alumni Relations Office, and especially around student initiatives and events programs. And if you're interested in learning more, our student engagement team is here. You met Megan, and Chelsea is also with us as well, and they'd be happy to talk to you about it. So to end this evening, we have some refreshments out in the atrium. Please help yourself. And thanks again for coming. And to those of you that are students, good luck with your finals, and I'm sure that wrap will help all of you in the anatomy class. So thank you for being here.